the final decade of the 20th century, Earth had become a deeply troubled planet. With blind arrogance, humanity assumed ownership. In our quest for property, we felled and torched the forests. In our hunger for resources, we starved the land. In the name of progress, we choked the air. Nature could not endure this abuse and retaliated with angry warnings that scorched vast areas by heat wave and drought. Earth was drenched by floods and blasted with hurricanes. In the skies, barriers that had held back powerful rays for billions of years were disintegrating. Scientists watched gauges and took measurements. They realized the shield between us and the sun was becoming thinner. Wide gaps were opening as poisons drifted high in the air, dissolving the ozone layer like acid on cloth. The sun burst through these holes and penetrated Earth with deadly strength. Billions of tons of destructive gases were pumped into the air from hundreds of millions of cars, from gigantic smokestacks and churning machinery. The gases became trapped, and slowly the planet grew hotter, the weather no longer familiar or predictable. The increasing heat expanded oceans and seas. The world's land map began to change. Few had believed that major cities would be abandoned. When oceans flowed far beyond their shores, land that humanity had used to grow food was rendered useless. And as irrigation drenched our farmland and more trees were pulled from the ground, salt rose to its surface like the silent enemy of fertility. Starvation was imminent. We waited with diminishing breath in the smothered and stifled air on the abused and poisoned land beyond the dying oceans. As the waters claimed the land, there came another tide, a tide of hunger unknown in human history. The population of Earth could withstand little more growth, yet with suicidal madness, we doubled our occupancy. Within 4 short decades, there were over 10 billion people. As the land diminished, the numbers grew. Our precious home became a starving pit. The ultimate plague was people. Billions more than the Earth could sustain. And in that final decade of the 20th century, all this had seemed inevitable. All this had been set in motion. No one could reassure humanity that the Earth had not been pushed beyond the brink. And yet, we didn't plunge to the rescue of our only home. We continued to fire up our motors and send up our gases. We dumped toxic wastes in rivers and lakes, in seas and oceans. We attacked the forests that gave us air.
Yuri yuri mo, yuri yuri mo, yuri yuri mo, pukaro mo ba, newa doi gato. Yuri yuri mo, 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 pukaro mo ba, newa doi gato.
As the trees disappeared, so too did the fourth world, the final few tribal societies who lived beyond the madness. In condemning nature, progress also condemned these, her true children. Few of us were humble enough to see that in allowing their passing, humanity had shrugged off its last contact with nature. Bows, arrows, and blowpipes could never resist the angry claw of civilization, with its arsenal of illness and alcohol, bulldozers, dams, roads, the gun, and worst of all, dissolution. The dams were built and the trees were drowned. A highway was gouged through the forest. There came a time, as the new century reached its second decade, when we could only watch the scars and infection spread, and we could only gasp at the ignorance that had abused this wondrous fragility. We had long known that the Amazon gave us 1/4 of all of our oxygen, that that the Amazon gave us so many of our medicines that within the Amazon there were miracles awaiting discovery. And still, the greedy conqueror plotted his own defeat. Ranchers burned the forest so hamburger meat could feed the throwaway society. With them came humble farmers with no money to fertilize subsistence crops. Rich man and poor man plowed new soil and it began to die. Together they moved deeper into the forest, and the forest retreated. Moving with their torches, they burned a vast new desert onto the map. It was here that ecology was crippled beneath the bulldozer of economics. And in the affluent West, rich men turned their backs on the desolation and said, "You can't stop progress, and growth is good." Humanity was hell-bent on destroying the very elements that could save it. The forests were Earth's lungs. They could take in the fumes of car and machinery and change them to sweet air. But there were not enough trees to hold back the endless stream of poison gases. Civilization cut down these last vestiges of hope like an ogre slashing its wrists. The poisoned skies became laden with chemicals that turned to rain and fell on more forest. Abused for too long by humanity, a crippled nature withdrew its mighty concessions. Our morbid decree against survival persisted. Our food needed shipping and storing, and all that mattered to us was the look of it. We preserved food with radiation and chemicals. We searched for new ways of presenting and packaging nature. Everything used and useless could be tossed out, wrapped in plastic and collected by trucks as we slept. It began as convenient packaging for a throwaway age and ended in poisonous mountains of waste, discharging gases and liquids into air and oceans. Beneath the ground, out of sight and out of mind, humanity could only hide but never destroy much of its waste. But our denial of nature went further. We used chemical fertilizers to assault the burdened land. We had condemned ourselves to death by starvation, just as we had starved the soil we so desperately needed. Instead of restoring the soil with our body waste, we shrugged off a natural cycle that had sustained us for thousands of years. We mixed it with the chemicals and detergents from home and industry, and poured the deadly mix into the sea. We discharged the dirtiest of waters into our oceans, and when our wastes were too toxic for burial, they were sunk in the depths of the seas. Our belief was the ocean was a bottomless sewer. Like every other crisis, humanity had left it too late. A Western generation had been raised with the expectation of every comfort. It had chosen to forget that unlike everything else in the throwaway society, it could not throw out its home planet and expect to survive. It could not destroy complexity and creatures by the millions and expect the Earth to continue accommodating this madness forever. And yet, with the naivety and greed, the ignorance and apathy that had brought us to desolation, we were surprised when the day arrived in which Earth and humanity were no longer partners. Just as we had failed to live in peace with ourselves, we could no longer live in peace with the planet. We had lost our right to life on Earth.